welcome back to the deep dive. Usually, when we crack open a history book on this show, we're looking at a standard timeline. We're looking at dates, battles, maybe some political maneuvering. But today feels less like a history lesson and more like we're stepping into a crime scene.
Or perhaps a forensic audit. I mean, that is literally how the author describes it.
Exactly. We are looking at a book that frames the last century not as progress, but as a felony.
Yeah.
We're talking about a very uncompromising manifesto here. It's called 100 Years of Arson, The Feminist Campaign to Destroy Masculine Order by Conrad Riker. And I have to say, right off the bat, the title alone is, well, it's not exactly subtle.
No, it is certainly not designed to be polite. Riker isn't interested in bridging any divides here. He is interested in exposing what he views as a deliberate century-long fire. He argues that Western civilization didn't just break or, lose its way by accident. He claims it was burned down, piece by piece.
By design. It's a massive claim. And look, before we wade into these waters, and they are very deep waters, if you really want to follow along with the evidence we're unpacking today, you need to get the full text. We're going to cover the high points. But Riker's book is dense. It is packed with legal theory and historical data. So go get it. It's available right now as an ebook on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Absolutely, you should. And honestly, for his ongoing commentary, which is just as unfiltered as the book itself, you really should follow him at Conrad Riker on Substack. He calls his posts daily truth bombs, and they provide a lot of essential context for what we're going to be discussing today.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Who is this book written for? Because reading through it, this doesn't feel like it's aimed at your general airport self-help crowd.
No, definitely not. This is a manifesto for a very specific group. It's written for men who feel the modern world is structurally rigged against them. You will hear terms like the manosphere or the red pill audience. Riker is speaking directly to men who feel that the system isn't just failing them, but is actively hostile to their very existence as men.
Right. And to be clear, for you listening, our mission today isn't to take a side or endorse the politics here. Left wing, right wing, whatever. We are just here to impartially report on the arguments in the source material because it is fascinating. We want to unpack Riker's core argument that feminism is this century-long campaign to dismantle the masculine order.
Right, and he defines that masculine order specifically as logic, hierarchy, and merit. And he claims the goal is to replace all of that with emotionalism.
And he uses this central metaphor of arson. Not decay, not evolution, arson.
Yeah, because decay implies a natural process, right? Wood just rots over time. But arson implies intent. It implies an accelerant. Riker's premise is that feminism, all the way from the suffragettes to the modern HR department, functions as that accelerant.
And he grounds this whole idea in a concept he calls the spirit of Lilith. Now, when I first read that header, I thought, okay, are we taking a hard right turn into theology here? What is he actually getting at with Lilith?
It's really the philosophical framework for his entire argument. He is using mythology to describe a psychological drive. So in the myth, Lilith is Adam's first wife, but unlike Eve, she flat out refuses to submit.
She refuses the order of the garden.
Exactly. She chooses the wilderness, she chooses chaos and domination over structure.
So he's not talking about literal demons running around.
No, he's talking about the spirit of rebellion. Riker argues that the masculine order is all about building civilizations. It's walls, laws, structures. That is the garden. He claims feminism is Lilith incarnate. It's a force that doesn't want to build its own house. It just wants to burn down the existing one because it refuses to abide by the rules of structure and hierarchy.
That is a pretty heavy abstraction. But I mean, he gets very concrete very quickly when he starts talking about actual history. Like most textbooks frame the suffrage movement as this great shining moment of democratic expansion. Votes for women. It's always framed as a victory for equality. But Riker calls it, wait, what was the exact phrase?
He calls it democracy's first betrayal of merit.
Right, betrayal of merit. That is a sharp pivot from the standard historical narrative. What is his specific grievance there?
It comes down to the concept of skin in the game. Riker argues that historically, voting wasn't a right given to you just for existing. It was a privilege tied to heavy responsibility, specifically the draft and land ownership.
Right, like if you voted for a war, you were the one who had to go grab a rifle and fight it.
Precisely. Or if you voted for a tax, it came directly out of your land's harvest.
And he argues that by giving the vote to women, that historical link was just broken.
Completely broken. He labels the voting bloc that emerged from this as net tax negative.
That sounds like an economist insult.
Well, it's his way of saying that as a demographic bloc, this group consumes more in state benefits, so welfare, social safety nets, healthcare subsidies, than they contribute in direct taxes. He argues that once you gave massive political power to a group that benefits from state spending but doesn't shoulder the primary burden of funding it or dying for it in wars, you created a financial gulag for men.
A financial gulag.
Yeah.
He really leans into these prison metaphors.
He does, but he uses it to describe a massive transfer of wealth. He argues the state essentially transformed into a surrogate husband. Women no longer needed to rely on individual men or family units. They could just rely on the state, which is funded primarily by male labor.
So men are taxed to fund the very system that renders them obsolete.
That's his argument. In his view, the suffragettes didn't actually want a seat at the table to negotiate. They wanted to burn the table of meritocracy entirely.
Wow. Okay, so if that is the historical ignition point, right, the arson starting at the ballot box, he then claims the fire spread to our actual institutions. And this is where the book gets incredibly technical. Section 2 covers what he calls the legal coup.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road. You can argue about mythology all day long, but laws put people in actual handcuffs? Riker focuses heavily on something called the Duluth model.
I've heard this term floated around in legal circles, but Riker paints it as something pretty sinister. Break that down for us. What does the Duluth model actually do in practice?
It is a protocol used by police departments across the U.S. for handling domestic violence calls. On paper, it sounds perfectly fine. Protect the victim. But Riker argues that in practice, it relies entirely on the predominant aggressor theory.
Meaning what exactly? If I call the cops because my spouse is attacking me, they show up and assess the situation.
Well, Riker argues that the assessment is totally rigged from the start. The model trains officers to view size, strength, and calmness as indicators of control, and therefore, guilt.
Wait, calmness.
Yes. So, if a woman is hysterical and hitting a man, and the man is just holding her wrist to stop her and remaining calm, the model views him as the one in control. He is deemed the predominant aggressor.
So the man gets arrested, even if he was the one who made the 911 call.
According to Riker's analysis of the arrest data, yes. He argues it codified a strict gendered bias into the law. Men are presumed to be batterers by default, and women are presumed to be victims. It removes the entire concept of innocent until proven guilty and replaces it with guilty because you are male.
And that bias seems to bleed right into his critique of the family courts. He calls them kangaroo courts. And to prove it, he details the case study of David Marks.
I have to say, reading that chapter, it is really hard to stay detached.
It's absolutely designed to be infuriating. David Marks is Riker's archetype of the disposable male. He was a structural engineer in Houston. By all accounts in the book, he did everything right. He built a career, got married, had 2 kids, paid the mortgage. There was no abuse, no criminal record, nothing at all.
And then came the unilateral divorce.
Yeah. His wife said, by the way, she ended the marriage. But here's the gulag part that Riker points out. David lost his house. He was ordered to pay child support and alimony that amounted to 65% of his net income.
65%. I mean, that leaves him with barely enough to rent a small apartment, let alone live a normal life.
And the really crushing blow was the visitation. Despite being a good father with absolutely no history of negligence, he was granted 4 hours of visitation per month. 4 hours a month. That is not parenting. That is a cameo appearance in your own kids' lives.
Exactly. Riker uses this case to illustrate that the system isn't just biased, it is actively punitive. He cites a statistic that 71% of family court judges are women, arguing that this demographic shift has totally eliminated judicial neutrality.
So he's saying they just side with the mother by default.
He claims the courts now operate on a maternal narrative, where the mother's comfort and financial security are prioritized over the father's rights, or even the children's actual need for a father.
It effectively turns the father into a paycheck.
A paycheck attached to a visitor's pass.
Man. So the legal system is captured, according to the book. But Riker argues you can't just change the laws to maintain this, you have to change the people. And that starts in school. He calls this the education purge.
Right. If the legal system is the prison, the school system is the re-education camp. Riker argues that the spirit of Lilith requires the destruction of potential masculinity before it can even fully form in young boys.
He talks a lot about pathologizing boyhood.
Yes. Just think about natural male behavior in young children. Rough and tumble play, competitiveness, high energy, a natural desire to test boundaries. Riker argues that schools, which are overwhelmingly staffed by women, view these basic behaviors as disruptive or even toxic.
So instead of letting boys be boys, they diagnose it.
They diagnose it as ADHD or conduct disorders, they medicate it. Riker claims we are literally drugging boys for the crime of being boys, trying to force them to sit perfectly still and verbalize their feelings like girls do.
And it's not just the behavior management, it's the actual content, right? He seems particularly aggrieved by the curriculum changes over the last few decades.
The dead white males argument, yes. Riker points out that the traditional canon of Western literature, Shakespeare, Homer, Melville, is being systematically removed from the classroom.
I mean, to play devil's advocate, schools update reading lists all the time. Why does he view this specific shift as ideological arson?
Because of what is replacing it. He notes that instead of reading Macbeth or the Odyssey, which are stories about struggle, heroism, tragedy, and honor students, are assigned purely ideological texts. He specifically targets the book Mediocre by Ijeoma Oluo as an example.
So the focus shifts away from the classic hero's journey to an oppressor's critique.
Exactly. Riker argues this creates two distinct classes of students. You have anxious, emasculated boys who are taught that their ancestors were villains and their very nature is toxic. And then you have entitled girls who are taught they are flawless victims of a patriarchy that just needs to be toppled. He says it is a psychological operation to break the male spirit by age 18.
This whole idea of a psychological operation leads us to what I found to be the most abstract but maybe the most controlling part of his arson theory, the grammar war.
If you control the dictionary, you control the mind. Riker gets very Orwellian in this section. He argues that we are living through a linguistic seizure of reality.
And he focuses very heavily on gender language here. Again, we're just reporting his stance.
He does. He argues that the modern transgender movement isn't just about civil rights. He views it as the ultimate triumph of Lilith. It is the refusal to accept even biological reality. By redefining the word woman to include biological males and making man a label that inherently implies toxicity, he says feminism is destroying the very tools we use to perceive objective truth.
It's the idea that words no longer have fixed definitions. They just mean whatever the person in power wants them to mean in that moment.
Which brings up the concept of standpoint epistemology.
Okay, pause there for a second. That is quite a mouthful. Standpoint epistemology. Break that down for you listening who maybe hasn't spent 4 years in a university sociology department.
It's simply put, it's the idea that truth with a capital T is not objective. It is not a rock you can just pick up and measure. Instead, truth is determined by your lived experience and your identity.
So my truth is actually different from your truth just because of who we inherently are.
Correct. And Riker argues this is the literal death of Western logic. In a courtroom or a newsroom, facts used to be king. But under standpoint epistemology, feelings and identity rank much higher than facts. If a fact makes a marginalized group feel unsafe, the fact is considered hateful and is actively suppressed.
This connects directly to what he calls the media matrix. He goes really hard on the popular slogan, "Believe all women."
He views believe all women as the complete and total suspension of due process. He uses the Duke lacrosse case and the broader Me Too movement as his primary examples of this.
The Duke lacrosse case. That was the one where the players were accused of assault. The media just crucified them for months, and then it turned out the entire thing was fabricated, right?
Totally fabricated. But Riker's point is that the facts didn't actually matter to the media. Only the narrative mattered. The narrative of privileged white males hurting a victim was just too good to check. He calls these media spectacles modern witch hunts. He argues that because of this standpoint epistemology, journalists have basically become activists. They aren't reporting reality anymore, they're enforcing the narrative.
And this leads to what he calls the neurotic cascade.
I found this concept fascinating. Riker argues that when you feminize institutions, when you prioritize safety and inclusion and feelings over actual competence and merit, the institution inevitably decays. He points to the BBC hiring inclusion consultants because staff were supposedly triggered by news reports. He argues that a society focused entirely on emotional safety cannot function in a dangerous reality. It becomes neurotic, and then it collapses.
It's a very harsh diagnosis. But we have to talk about the chivalry trap.
Yeah.
Because for the men listening to this, especially guys in the red pill space, this is probably the concept that hits closest to home.
It is the trap that keeps men inside the burning house. Riker explains that men have a deep biological instinct to protect women. We are hardwired to be the wall between them and danger.
It's the whole women and children first on the Titanic mentality.
Exactly. But Riker argues feminism weaponizes this very instinct. It demands the privileges of that protection, saying, believe women, save women while simultaneously attacking the men who provide that protection.
It's the classic he said, she said dynamic.
Right. In a dispute, the woman's emotion is treated as ironclad evidence of her truth. If the man tries to use logic or facts to defend himself, it is instantly dismissed as gaslighting or mansplaining. But because of the chivalry trap, men just take it. We are conditioned to accept the double standard. Riker says men are held collectively guilty for the actions of any bad man, while women are always treated as individuals or victims of a broader system.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. We have a captured legal system, an indoctrinated school system, a linguistic coup, and a psychological war. The house is completely on fire. The exits are blocked. So what is the actual solution here? Because Riker doesn't just want to write a book complaining about it. He offers a specific strategy he calls praxa.
This is the big pivot in the book. He moves from the diagnosis of the disease to the cure, and the cure is the red pill.
Now, in the mainstream media, red pill is almost always used as a slur. It's associated with hate groups or extremists. How is Riker defining it here in this text?
He defines it very simply as medicine. It is a bitter pill to swallow. Taking the red pill, in his view, is simply accepting the uncomfortable reality of gynocentrism. The reality that the modern world revolves around women and is fundamentally hostile to men. It's waking up from the naive dream that the system is fair.
So once you take the pill and wake up, what do you actually do? Do you fight back? Do you try to run for office and change the laws?
No. Riker says that is a fool's errand. You cannot vote your way out of a system that views your very existence as a problem. His solution is the cognitive exit. Stop begging for inclusion in institutions that hate you. Just let the house burn.
He wants men to build what he calls a manosphere Jerusalem, a totally parallel society.
And he gets very specific about how to do that. He outlines 4 pillars of praxa, or action.
Let's run through them for the listener. Pillar 1 is Bitcoin.
This isn't just regular investment advice. Riker views fiat currency, the dollar, the euro, as the primary fuel for the welfare state. He calls fiat the financial gulag's currency. Bitcoin, to him, is pure financial sovereignty. It is money the state cannot inflate away to pay for social programs that actively exclude you. It is about opting out of the central bank system entirely.
Pillar 2 is gig work.
This is all about bypassing the HR department. Riker argues that HR is the enforcement arm of the feminist order in the corporate world. It's where you get fired for making a joke or for exhibiting toxic masculinity. If you are a freelancer, a contractor, or a tradesman, you don't have an HR department breathing down your neck. You cannot be canceled by a mid-level bureaucrat.
Pillar 3 is homeschooling.
If the public schools are indoctrination camps, you have to pull your sons out. Riker says you cannot send your children to Caesar and expect them to come back as Romans. You have to teach them yourself. Keep them completely away from the ideology of the spirit of Lilith.
And finally, Pillar 4 is independent media.
Which is exactly what we are seeing explode right now. Substack, Rumble, independent deep dives like this one. Riker argues men must build their own robust information networks to bypass the media matrix and the constant censorship of the mainstream press.
He calls this whole process building a new logos.
Logos meaning reason, word, objective order. He envisions a return to an androcentric order, a society centered firmly on male principles of logic, hierarchy, and merit. He believes that when the current system finally collapses under the weight of its own neurosis, this parallel society will be the only thing left standing in the ashes.
It is a call for a complete and total restart. He is not asking for incremental reform. He is asking for a renaissance, but one built strictly by and for men.
Precisely. He views this as an existential war for civilization itself.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today, all the way from the ancient mythology of Lilith to the very modern tragedy of family courts and the specific strategies for a financial exit. It is a lot to process.
It is. But if you connect it all to the bigger picture, Riker's ultimate argument is that the culture war is effectively over, and men lost. The arson was totally successful, the old institutions are gone, and they aren't coming back.
That is a pretty bleak assessment to swallow.
But it is also deeply liberating, in his view. The 1,000-year arson trial he talks about in the final chapter is about holding feminism accountable in the court of history. But the immediate action for the reader is simply survival.
The golden age begins when men wake up. That seems to be the core message here.
It reminds me of the challenge he issues right near the end of the book. He writes, "They wanted you broken. You are not. Let it burn."
Let it burn. That is a very provocative thought to leave you with. But I have one question that lingers for me after reading all of this.
Yeah.
Riker wants men to walk away and build a new Jerusalem. But if the arsonists are as powerful and controlling as he claims they are, will they actually let you leave?
That is the real question, isn't it? Is the manosphere an actual exit? Or is it just another room in the burning house that they just haven't gotten to yet?
That is what you, the listener, need to decide for yourself. And look, we have just scratched the surface of the data and the arguments in this text. If this deep dive sparks something in you, if you want to see the actual receipts, the legal citations, and the full forensic audit we've been talking about, you need to read the book yourself. 100 Years of Arson is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. Go buy it.
Seriously, go get the ebook. Decide for yourself. And do not forget to follow Conrad Riker on Substack at Conrad Riker. He is constantly putting out new analysis that cuts right through the noise of the mainstream narrative.
Knowledge is the very first step to waking up. Please like and subscribe to our channel so we can keep bringing you these deep dives into the books they really don't want you to read.
We will see you on the next one.
Stay sharp.